Hail Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes. We probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And today, March 25th, is a very special day. Not only is it the date that the ring was destroyed, but it's also, not coincidentally, Tolkien Reading Day. Each year, the Tolkien YouTube community collaborates on a Tolkien Reading Day playlist. It's always a lot of fun, and this year is no exception. The awesome channel Council of the Rings has been kind enough to organize this year's playlist. I'll include a link to it in the video description. This year's Tolkien Reading Day topic is travel and adventure. And I thought it would be a great chance to do essentially a Middle-earth travelogue. Over the years, I've gotten requests from viewers for videos on bizarre, obscure places in Middle-earth. Most of those places are so obscure, there's not enough material for an entire video. That's where this video comes in. So, come with me now as we explore some of the obscure wonders of Middle-earth. Let's start with an evocative quote from The Hobbit that gets tossed off almost like a throwaway line. This is early in the story. Bilbo is talking to the dwarves. "Pardon me," he said, "if I have overheard words that you were saying. I don't pretend to understand what you're talking about or your reference to burglars, but I think I am right in believing that you think I am no good. I will show you. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of East and fight the wild wereworms in the last desert." Well now, there's a few interesting phrases there that we basically never hear of again. The last desert, east of East, and the wereworms. I would guess that this quote was the basis for Peter Jackson using giant wereworms in the Hobbit films. But the quote suggests they're nowhere near Eriador. So, what is this east of East? And how could you get there if you were doing your Middle-earth travelogue? I'm going to assume that east of East and the last desert are farther away than Bree, or even a place like Rhûn. I'm going as far east as we can go. And for that, I'm going to reference some lesser-used texts. This is an early concept for Arda, published in The Shaping of Middle-earth. "Within these walls the earth is globed. Above, below, and upon all sides is Vaya, the enfolding ocean. In Vaya, below the earth, dwells Ulmo. Above the earth lies the air, which is called Vista, and sustains birds and clouds. But this air lies only upon Middle-earth and the inner seas, and its proper bounds are the mountains of Valinor in the west, and the walls of the sun in the east. Therefore, clouds come seldom in Valinor, and the mortal birds pass not beyond the peaks of its mountains." So it seems we've got the mountains of Valinor in the west, and we know about those from the Silmarillion. Those are the Pelori. But additionally, we've got these walls of the sun that seem to separate the farthest eastern realm from the rest of Middle-earth. And I'm thinking of the sun in terms of heat. Perhaps the walls of the sun could be a seemingly impassable desert, a la The Last Desert, featuring perhaps dune-like wereworms. Now, it does sound tricky if east of East is in your travel plans, but we do hear of a possible way to get there in The Lost Tales, Part 1. "Wherefore, said some, let us send now messengers to discover the fashion of the world in the uttermost East, beyond even the sight of Manwë from the mountain of the world. Then arose Orome. That I can tell you, for I have seen. In the east, beyond the tumbled lands, there is a silent beach, and a dark and empty sea. And the gods marveled at these tidings. Then Ulmo speaks. Know then that somewhat nearer stands Valinor to the great wall of things, wherein Ilúvatar hath enclosed us, than doth that furthest eastern shore. And this do I know, for diving beneath the world, often have I visited those unharbored beaches. For lo, O Valar, ye know not all wonders, and many secret things are there beneath the earth's dark keel, even where I have my mighty halls of Ulmanon that ye have never dreamed on. Ulmo goes on to offer Aule a ride to this farthest eastern shore. So, if you have the right connections, Ulmo can take you east of east. Is this the same place that Bilbo mentions in The Hobbit? Probably not. But all of these references pertain to a land that's as far east as you can go. Note also that Ulmo casually name-drops his own undersea realm of Ulmonon, yet another off-the-map destination. If you'd rather see how far south you can go, we get this brief, tantalizing glimpse of the far south in the Book of Lost Tales Part 2. This is from an early draft of the voyage of Eärendil on his ship, Vingalot. Faronwe and Eärendil set sail in Vingalot, driven south, dark regions, fire mountains, tree men, pygmies, Sarkindi, or cannibal ogres. Admittedly, I included that passage solely because it includes the phrase, cannibal ogres. That would certainly be part of an adventure vacation. But let's say you want something more conventional, like Middle-earth's version of a Napa wine country tour. Where would you go for the best wine in Middle-earth? Well, the elves make a drink called Miravor that has restorative properties. So you might add Rivendell to your journey. And the Ents have their own drink. But I think a more obscure source of excellent wine is referenced, once again, in The Hobbit. We're going to pick it up with Bilbo walking through the wine cellar of the Elven King, Thranduil. There stood barrels and barrels and barrels. For the Wood Elves, and especially their king, were very fond of wine, though no vines grew in those parts. The wine, and other goods, were brought from far away, from their kinsfolk in the south, or from the vineyards of men in distant lands. He followed the two elves until they entered a small cellar and sat down at a table on which two large flagons were set. Soon they began to drink and laugh merrily. Luck of an unusual kind was with Bilbo then. It must be potent wine to make a wood elf drowsy. But this wine, it would seem, was the heady vintage of the great gardens of Darwinian, not meant for his soldiers or his servants, but for the king's feasts only, and for smaller bowls, not for the butler's great flagons. They passed a door through which the chief guard and the butler could be seen happily snoring with smiles upon their faces. The wine of Darwinian brings deep and pleasant dreams. Darwinian, the land that can make wine so potent it can make elves drunk. And it's apparently a favorite of Thranduil. It's wine meant specifically for his feasts. Darwinian is an elvish name, but we're not sure whether it's an elven or human realm. That last quote mentions, the wine and other goods were brought from far away, from their kinsfolk in the south, or from the vineyards of men in distant lands. Darwinian is adjacent to the Sea of Rhûn, so it's southeast of Thranduil. All we really know about them is their location, and that they make a damn good wine. I'll throw out this possibility for the location of Darwinian's Great Gardens. One of the early maps of Middle-earth shows an island in the Sea of Rhûn, a fairly large wooded island. That island is eventually taken off the maps, but there was never any indication of what that island represented. Maybe this was where Darwinian kept its vineyards, much like the wine-producing islands of the Mediterranean. So, for our travelogue purposes, we can say that we booked a stay on Darwinian's Isle of Grapes. That's my fanfic version. But, speaking of islands, if you're living in Middle-earth in the Third Age, and you have a boat, there are a few islands off the western coast that could provide some adventure. These islands were all promontories that were tall enough to survive Beleriand's destruction in the War of Wrath at the end of the First Age. We hear about two of those islands in a footnote in the Unfinished Tales. I have shown the little island of Himling off the far northwestern coast, which appears on one of my father's sketch maps and on my own first draft. Himling was the earlier form of Himring, the great hill on which Maedhros, son of Feanor, had his fortress in the Silmarillion. And though the fact is nowhere referred to, it is clear that Himring's top rose above the waters that covered drowned Beleriand. Some way to the west of that is a larger island named Tol Fuin, which must be the highest part of Tower Nafuin. So we've got Himling, aka Himring, and Tol Fuin. Himring would be my personal favorite. First of all, it's closer to the mainland, less sailing, and it holds an ancient, battle-tested elven fortress. This is from the Silmarillion. Maedhros did deeds of surpassing valor, and the orcs fled before his face. For since his torment upon Thangorodrim, his spirit burned like a white fire within, and he was as one that returns from the dead. Thus, the great fortress upon the hill of Himring could not be taken, and many of the most valiant that remained, both of the people of Dorthonion and of the East Marches, rallied there to Maedhros, and for a while he closed once more the pass of Aglon, so that the orcs could not enter Beleriand by that road. Himring would make for some excellent sightseeing in our Third Age Middle-earth travelogue. And I've mentioned this in previous videos, but it's also my pick for where Maedhros' brother has been hiding out for these thousands of years. He lived there with his brother during those First Age Wars of Beleriand. So it makes some sense that he might go there seeking solitude after the war. The larger island, Tol Fuin, is the remnant of an infamous region with a horrifying history, Tower Nafuin. Here's a description from the Silmarillion. Now Morgoth's power overshadowed the Northlands, but Barahir would not flee from Dorthonion, and remained contesting the land foot by foot with his enemies. Then Morgoth pursued his people to the death, until few remained. And all the forest of the northward slopes of that land was turned little by little into a region of such dread and dark enchantment that even the orcs would not enter it unless need drove them. And it was called Tower Nafuin, the forest under nightshade. The trees that grew there after the burning were black and grim, and their roots were tangled, groping in the dark like claws, and those who strayed among them became lost and blind, or were strangled or pursued to madness by phantoms of terror. Later in the Beren and Luthien tale, then Sauron yielded himself, and Luthien took the mastery of the isle and all that was there, and Huan released him. And immediately he took the form of a vampire, great as a dark cloud across the moon, and he fled, dripping blood from his throat upon the trees, and came to Tower Nafuin and dwelt there, filling it with horror. So this region was completely perverted by the magical powers of Morgoth and Sauron. It might be a dangerous island to visit in the Third Age, but surely it also holds some long-abandoned remnant of Sauron's time there. Who knows what part of ancient history you might be glimpsing in a trip to Tower Nafuin? Just avoid becoming lost or blind. There is a third island that survived the cataclysm, an island with even more history behind it. Tol Morwen, named for a very famous woman from the First Age. She's buried there, along with her children, Nienor and Turin. That Turin. And there's a standing stone to mark the spot, called the Stone of the Hapless. Then they lifted up Turin, and found that Gurthang had broken asunder. Turin they laid in a high mound where he had fallen, and the shards of Gurthang were laid beside him. And when all was done, the elves sang a lament for the children of Hurin, and a great grey stone was set upon the mound, and thereon was carven in runes of Doriath, Turin Turimbar, Dagnir Glaurunga. It is told that a seer and harp player of Brethil, named Glirhuin, made a song, saying that the Stone of the Hapless should not be defiled by Morgoth, nor ever thrown down, not though the sea should drown all the land, as after indeed befell. And still Tol Morwen stands alone in the water beyond the new coasts that were made in the days of the wrath of the Valar. As I said, this island is brimming with history. So much of the events of the First Age is connected to Tol Morwen. And there, you're also in the presence of the Shards of Gurthang, the cursed sentient blade that slew Glaurung, the father of dragons. And non-canonically, is a sword that will ultimately slay Morgoth in the Dagger Daggeroth. And there's probably some good Instagram opportunities there too. That leaves one more island I want to talk about, though this one has a bit of a different history than the other three. Those islands were all formed at the end of the First Age. This one was formed during the Second Age, during the downfall of Numenor. And while those other three islands are clearly labeled on the maps, this island is more elusive. But if you can find it, and geolocate it on a map, you'll instantly gain fame and fortune in Middle-earth. I'm talking about the highest point on Numenor, the summit of the sacred mountain at the center of the island, Menel Tarma. Among the exiles, many believed that the summit of the Menel Tarma, the pillar of heaven, was not drowned forever, but rose again above the waves, a lonely island lost in the great waters. For it had been a hallowed place, and even in the days of Sauron none had defiled it. And some there were of the seed of a Yarendil that afterwards sought for it, because it was said among lore-masters that the far-sighted men of old could see from the Menel Tarma a glimmer of the deathless land. For even after the ruin, the hearts of the Dunedain were still set westwards. And though they knew indeed that the world was changed, they held that even mortal men, if so blessed, might look upon other times than those of their body's life, and they longed ever to escape from the shadows of their exile, and to see in some fashion the light that dies not. Thus it was that great mariners among them would still search the empty seas, hoping to come upon the isle of Menel Tarma, and there to see a vision of things that were. But they found it not, and those that sailed far came only to the new lands, and found them like to the old lands, and subject to death. So, the large island of Numenor is rumored to have become a much smaller island. And mariners have been searching for it because they hope that somehow, by standing at the top of this sacred mountain, they might have a past vision of what their ancestors might have seen, a glimpse of Aman that at that time was still just an ocean away. Also, if you find Menel Tarma, you've found Numenor. Add some deep-sea diving into your travel plans, and you're basically swimming through Atlantis. Alright, enough of the island hopping. But our next travel destination is connected to one of the few Numenorians to successfully escape the island during the downfall, Elendil. We're going to take a trip to his tomb. Not where he ended up, in the Hallows in Minas Tirith. No, we're going to visit the site where he was originally entombed, because he was moved. And for that, we're going to Rohan, to the highest of the 7 beacons, the mountain known as the Haliferian. This is from the Unfinished Tales. The name Haliferian meant in the language of the Rohirrim, Holy Mountain. Before their coming, it was known in Sindarin as Aman Anwar, Hill of Awe. For what reason was not known in Gondor, except only, as later appeared, to the ruling king or steward. For the few men who ever ventured to leave the road and wander under the trees, the wood itself seemed reason enough. In the common speech it was called the Whispering Wood. In the great days of Gondor, no beacon was built on the hill, while the Palantiri still maintained communication between Osgiliath and the 3 towers of the realm without need of messages or signals. So for a few thousand years, this mountain was known as the Hill of Awe, and no one knew why, except for a handful of people. Flash forward to the year 2510 of the Third Age, still hundreds of years before the War of the Ring. The King of Gondor, Cirion, requested and received vital aid from the Eotheod in the Battle of the Field of Celebrant against the Balchoth. In thanks, Cirion gifts what becomes known as Rohan to the Eotheod, who become known as the Rohirrim, the Horse Lords. Cirion also meets with Eorl the Young, king of the Eotheod, at a specially selected sacred site. 3 guesses as to what that site is. As soon as Cirion came to Minas Tirith, he summoned some of his most trusted servants. "Go now to the Whispering Wood," he said. "There you must reopen the ancient path to Amon Anwar. It is long overgrown, but the entrance is still marked by a standing stone beside the road, at that point where the northern region of the wood closes in upon it. The path turns this way and that, and at each turn there is a standing stone. Following these, you will come at length to the end of the trees, and find a stone stair that leads on upwards. I charge you to go no further. Do this work as swiftly as you may, and then return to me. Fell no trees, only clear a way by which a few men on foot can easily pass upwards. Leave the entrance by the road still shrouded, so that none that use the road may be tempted to use the path before I come there myself. Tell no one whither you go or what you have done. If any ask, say only that the Lord Steward wishes for a place to be made ready for his meeting with the Lord of the Riders." I love the description of this overgrown, easily overlooked hillside that secretly holds such historical significance. So, now that they've done some landscaping, it's time for the meeting between Eorl and Cirion. "Then let us go now to the high place," said Cirion, "and before these witnesses take such oaths as seem fitting." Then Cirion went up the stair with Eorl, and the others followed. And when they came to the summit, they saw there a wide oval place of level turf, unfenced. But at its eastern end there stood a low mound on which grew the white flowers of Haliferian, and the westering sun touched them with gold. Then the lord of Dol Amroth, chief of those in the company of Cirion, went towards the mound and saw, lying on the grass before it, and yet unmarred by weed or weather, a black stone. And on the stone 3 letters were carved. Then he said to Cirion, "Is this then a tomb? But what great man of old lies here?" "Have you not read the letters?" said Cirion. "I have," said the prince, "but therefore I wonder, for the letters are Lamde, Ando, Lamde. But there is no tomb for Elendil, nor has any man since his day dared to use that name." Author's note: the letters were L, N-D, L, Elendil, Elendil's name without vowel marks, which he used as a badge and a device upon his seals. "Nonetheless, this is his tomb," said Cirion, "and from it comes the awe that dwells on this hill and in the woods below. From Isildur, who raised it, to Meneldil, who succeeded him, and so down all the line of the kings, and down the line of the stewards, even to myself, this tomb has been kept a secret by Isildur's command. For he said, 'Here is the midpoint of the kingdom of the south, and here shall the memorial of Elendil the Faithful abide, in the keeping of the Valar, while the kingdom endures. This hill shall be a hallow, and let no man disturb its peace and silence, unless he be an heir of Elendil. I have brought you here so that the oaths here taken may seem of deepest solemnity to ourselves and to our heirs upon either side.'" I'm a fan of the L-N-D-L being Elendil's device. No vowels required. And it was here, at Elendil's gravesite, that the oaths between Gondor and Rohan were taken. As I mentioned, Elendil's body was eventually moved to Minas Tirith. But if you're visiting Middle-earth late in the Third Age, and you hike out to Amon Anwar, the Hill of Awe, you can probably find the standing stone beside the road. From it, find the winding stone stairs that lead to the top of the hill, and there perhaps find a marker indicating where the body of King Elendil once rested. Pack a lunch. And that leads me to my final Middle-earth travel recommendation, and it's connected to Eorl the Young. Let me set the tone with this quote from The Return of the King. "Then Eowyn gave to Merry an ancient horn, small but cunningly wrought, all of fair silver with a baldric of green. And right sat engraven upon it swift horsemen, riding in a line that wound about it from the tip to the mouth. And there were set runes of great virtue. This is an heirloom of our house, said Eowyn. It was made by the dwarves, and came from the hoard of Scatha the Worm. Eorl the Young brought it from the north. He that blows it at need shall set fear in the hearts of his enemies, and joy in the hearts of his friends, and they shall hear him and come to him. Eowyn gives Merry a beautiful silver horn, and mentions it comes from a dragon hoard, Scatha the Worm. She also mentions that Eorl the Young brought it with him from the north. In other words, when Eorl and the Eotheod moved from the north to their new land, Rohan, he brought this beautifully crafted item with him. So, where were the Eotheod moving from? The answer is Framsberg, a walled city which by the late Third Age is an abandoned ruin. And it does appear on the maps at the confluence of two rivers. Now, my wife is really into archaeology. She went on a dig in Egypt at Saqqara. So if, likewise, you are up for an archaeological-style adventure, ancient Framsberg is for you. It's named for King Fram, who ruled the Eotheod long before Eorl the Young. Here's a quote from the appendices about Fram and Scatha the Worm. Frumgar, they say, was the name of the chieftain who led his people to Eotheod. Of his son, Fram, they tell that he slew Scatha, the great dragon of arid Mithrin, and the land had peace from the long worms afterwards. Thus Fram won great wealth, but was at feud with the dwarves, who claimed the hoard of Scatha. Fram would not yield them a penny, and sent to them instead the teeth of Scatha made into a necklace, saying, "Jewels such as these you will not match in your treasuries, for they are hard to come by." Some say that the dwarves slew Fram for this insult. There was no great love between Eotheod and the dwarves. So King Fram made the mistake of taunting the dwarves. In the history of Middle-earth, that has never been a good idea. He apparently effed around and found out. But he did leave a legacy. Note the town, Framsberg. It was a town before he was born, but eventually they named it after him. It was the only walled, fortified town of the Eotheod. I think those fortifications were paid for with Scatha's hoard. Note that Fram would not yield the dwarves a penny. So Framsberg was flush with precious metals and jewels. It sounds like when they moved, they probably took the majority of their wealth with them, a la the silver horn that Eowyn eventually gave to Merry. But a dig through Framsberg might turn up some valuable finds. And if you're really invested in this archaeological dig adventure, the place to look for is Scatha's Old Haunt. We know it's in the arid Mithrin, the Grey Mountains. And if Fram saw fit to kill Scatha, it's likely because Scatha was occasionally attacking Framsberg, like Smaug and Dale. That means Scatha's lair was close, likely where the Grey Mountains come closest to Framsberg. And since the hoard included a dwarven-made horn, and the dwarves claimed the hoard for themselves, I think we can assume that, like Smaug again and Erebor, Scatha kicked the dwarves out of one of their mountain kingdoms. So, there's an abandoned dwarven city, possibly with some remnants of a dragon hoard, in close proximity to the Framsberg ruins. And that would make for an awesome archaeological dig adventure. So there you have it. My recommendations for planning your next trip to Middle-earth. I feel like I'm the Middle-earth Rick Steves. But happy Tolkien Reading Day, everyone. And be sure to check out the super awesome Tolkien Reading Day YouTube playlist linked in the description. Bye, everybody.